What is a ladybird deed? Clients contact me all the time asking me if they need a ladybird deed. What is a ladybird deed? They're often told about a ladybird deed from a friend, a family, something online that they watched. So in this video, I'm going to explain what a ladybird deed is, where the name came from, and whether or not you need it. A ladybird deed is an enhanced life estate deed. At Texas Tech Law School, and yes, it does look like this, prison is where my law professor taught us the story of how the enhanced life estate deed became known as the ladybird deed. He had been researching ladybird deeds and he came across statements like this in case law. The name comes from the mechanism that President Lyndon Johnson used to pass property to his wife, Ladybird Johnson, on his death. Being the ever studious person that he is, he researched the deed records, went to the Library of Congress, tried to find out what he could about this ladybird deed. And eventually he found an article written by Jerome Solkoff in 1982 as the oldest point where he can find a mention of the ladybird deed. He decided, since he couldn't find it in any of his literature, to call Mr. Solkoff, and he did, and got a hold of his son Scott. Solkoff told him that his father made up the name as part of his research and part of his explaining to attorneys on how to protect assets in a Medicaid situation. So Ladybird Johnson never used a ladybird deed. It is simply a name that he used to teach lawyers a trick on how to protect an asset. Why is it important? Almost every American, if they end up in a nursing home, will have to have government assistance to help pay for their care. The program that helps pay for people's care if you're in a nursing home is not Medicare, it's Medicaid. Medicaid has strict requirements, especially when it comes to asset, on whether or not you can qualify. One good thing Congress did when they passed this law is they made it so you could keep your primary residence and not have to sell it in order to qualify for Medicaid assistance. Congress was not attempting to be generous. They had also started the Medicaid estate recovery program, where the goal was to place a lien against the primary residence, so when the person who needed the help passed, that lien would attach to the property and ultimately Medicaid would get paid back. Of course, that doesn't sit well with most families. Most families want to keep their parents home, and so lawyers started to try to figure out ways around the rule. In the beginning, it was easy. You just deeded the home away and then you could keep the family home and the family. Then Congress passed the fraudulent transfer rule, and you're probably familiar with this rule. It's the 5-year look-back rule. You know, people will tell me all the time, oh, we're not supposed to give away property or gift away property unless it's more than 5 years in the past, then it won't count. You still can deed your property to certain people and not be considered a fraudulent transfer, like a spouse or disabled child, but we're not going to get into all the details and all the rules with Medicaid in this video. Also, the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1993 required states to implement at least a basic estate recovery process. OBRA allows the state, like Texas, to define the word estate. Before we go any further into understanding how a ladybird deed works, I want to give this important note. Since a state decides what the word estate means in recovering an asset, it's very important that you talk to an elder law attorney in your state. Do not talk to your friends. Do not consult Google. Do not consult a family member. Don't even consult a regular attorney. You want an elder law attorney to explain to you whether or not a ladybird deed will work in your state. In fact, it's very restrictive. Ladybird deeds are authorized in only a few states: Florida, Michigan, Texas, Vermont, West Virginia. Other states, though, have their own mechanisms, like a transfer on death deed. That being said, I'm going to give you Texas example of why it works and how it works in Texas. The Texas Medicaid Estate Recovery Program became effective on March 1st, 2005. Texas Administrative Code Section 373.1056 defines the state as the real and personal property of a decedent. Both as such, property originally existed as from time to time changed in form by sale, reinvestment, or otherwise, and as augmented by any accretions and additions and substitutions that are included in the definition of the probate estate found in Section 3I. In order to understand how a ladybird deed or enhanced life estate deed works, you need to understand a little bit about property law. In law school, we were taught it by using a bunch of pins or a bundle of sticks. And you think of each one of these sticks as a right, because what property really is rights to things. Because how do you really own something? It's outside of you. Well, we give you rights to it. And so when you give someone absolute rights to something, you're giving them all the sticks. Think about this as you don't really own your land. The state retains rights to tax you, so it gives you a bunch of other rights. Oh, you own the property, but we can take it from you anytime if you don't pay us. So they've taken and retained a right to property. So in this situation, when you're doing an enhanced life estate deed, the person who owns the property keeps the right to sell and the right to keep the proceeds, but then gives all the other rights away. And this was Mr. Solkoff and other attorneys' genius, they figured out, well, in order for a transfer, for the fraudulent transfer rule to work, you have to give the right to sell and keep the proceeds away. So if we retain those rights with our client and they give away all the other rights, the rights to have the property, to own it and enjoy it and consider it theirs to the kids, and then transfer the right to sell the property and keep the proceeds after someone passes away, so that's part 2 there, we effectively are able to retain the property in the family, transfer it to whoever we want to, the children usually, and Medicaid not recover because number 1, we didn't hit the fraudulent transfer rule. So because it wasn't a transfer, because we didn't give the right to sell and the right to keep the proceeds away until after someone passed away, it's not a transfer. And then 2, the estate recovery program that we talked about, it can't come in because the property is not part of the estate because it was already transferred away when the person was alive. You effectively avoid both problems. You created a loophole by combining different concepts. And in order to teach that concept, he called it the ladybird deed, but it already existed. It was called the enhanced life estate deed before that. This isn't the only way. So when you call and say, I need a ladybird deed, or my family says, I need a ladybird deed, well, we can do this with a transfer on death deed. A transfer on death deed does the same thing. Keeps the right to sell, keep the proceeds, consider the property yours, but it transfers the property outside of probate. So in Texas, a transfer on death deed works to avoid the Medicaid lien, where in other states it might not.